Excellent. Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started here in just a minute. Give it about 30 seconds for folks to join. We're so glad that you could attend today. Going to be a great experience and learn lots of cool things. Shark science is amazing, just as all science is amazing. Really enjoy, as a former science teacher myself, all about all things science.
Love that. I'm so excited for today. Let me
Yes.
start pulling up the screen.
Okay. And I'll just introduce myself. I am Jennifer Hammonds. I'm the Director of Education at the National Wildlife Federation. And I lead a program called Eco Schools US. It is a school sustainability and certification program. So some of you may be joining because you are in eco school, but some of you may also be joining because you are familiar with Sharks for Kids and their virtual classroom and great curriculum resources. So we've decided, because we just enjoy each other's company and our work, we want to collaborate and share our love of science, sustainability, conservation, and education with you all. So I'm going to pass it over to Jeyna and let her introduce herself and the content of her shark science content today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm super excited to be with you all today. I love talking about sharks and conservation, so this is a fantastic day. My name is Jeyna Ortiz. I am 25 years old. I'm from Puerto Rico as well. I have been an ambassador and volunteer with Sharks for Kids for about 3 years now. It's always a spectacular time getting to meet different people that love sharks from the scientific community, non-scientific community. And I think the best part is hanging around students that just have this major interest in sharks, are very curious about them, because that way I can make sure that when I am old, you guys are going to have the baton and are going to protect sharks and are going to keep them in our waters for a very, very long time. So our conversation today is going to be around shark science, the hows and the whys. So how we study sharks, what methods do we use, what gear do we use, and why we study them in the first place. So for a little bit of background on myself, I am an MPS student, that is Masters of Professional Science, graduate studies. I study marine conservation. And marine conservation, it sounds like a very, very complicated thing, and it is. It has to do everything with humans, aka people, how they view the world, what things do they want. You can talk about health, you can talk about threats to the environment, and everything that gets muddled in and complicated that has to be put into conversation. I have dedicated my studies to the conservation of sharks. And here is a little bit of what I do. So when we're out on the boat, it is a hot day, but it's always an awesome day. You get to handle all these different types of gears. You get to meet all these different types of people that either have never been on a boat or have plenty of experience on a boat. And it's always an amazing conversation with all of them. You get to handle teeny tiny little sharks, and you also get to handle big, big sharks like the one on the far right. That is a 7-foot lemon shark. Super fun. Also, another cool thing about me is that I also work for a sea turtle program, Miami-Dade County Parks Sea Turtle Conservation Program. So I also help protect sea turtle babies and the nesting mamas when they're in season. But apart from being a scientist, I love food. I love traveling. I love reading, and I love having a great time with people that I know and I don't know. So that being said, I am very excited to be here with you today and to teach you a little bit about sharks and what we do. Let's get started. Okay, so when we think about the word shark, 9 times out of 10, what's going to pop into our heads is this big guy over here at the top with a big snoot, that great white or white shark. Those guys can grow at least 19, 20 feet. We have seen them a bit bigger. They can look a little bit scary and intimidating, but now I want you to think about sharks as this big, big world that encompasses more than 500 species. And currently, science is finding even more species. And the cool thing about sharks is that more than half of them are smaller than 3 feet. So they're smaller than I am. I am 5'2". So we're talking about at least 80% of the sharks in the world are really, really small and are actually living in the deep sea. So most of the sharks that we see and have contact with are coastal sharks or coastal pelagic sharks. And that is actually a very, very small portion of that shark world. So when we're looking at sharks, or we're looking at this picture, we can see different shapes, different sizes, different colors. They all have different characteristics, which means that they serve different roles in the environment, as you could say. Some of them live near the sand and they use their pectoral fins to sort of like crawl and walk. Others live in the middle of the sea. Those are called pelagic, and they have big, big pectoral fins that sort of make them look like a plane. And you have sharks that live in very cold environments, like the Greenland shark over here at the bottom right. Those guys are amazing. They can live more than 300 years because they have a very, very slow metabolism, which means that they slow down all of the processes inside their body so that they don't waste much energy. And that gives them a very, very long life. So this is what I want you to think about when I mention the word sharks, not just Big Bruce from Jaws. It's this whole big, big world of different shapes and sizes, much like us humans. So when we're studying sharks, we encounter different complications. And some of them is, where do we even find the money and the resources to study sharks? It's very, very hard. But thankfully, we have these very, very special people that dedicate their lives to submitting documents and writing stuff that can be able to grant us this money to be able to do that research. So first, we're going to talk about the methods that we use to find sharks in the first place. So I want you to observe this picture. This picture is called a long line. Long lines are specific to smaller sharks. So you can either consider them babies, or you can consider them just smaller species of sharks in general. You're going to have one buoy on one side, one buoy on the other side, and that whole stretch can be about 100 feet. So that's really, really long. And within that 100 feet, you can have different individual lines with circle hooks, because circle hooks are easier to take off of the shark's mouth, because we really don't want to leave the shark very uncomfortable carrying this really big hook in their mouth. So what that does is that it attracts the shark by having a bait on that hook, and that bait can be smelly, it can look pretty gray, and they're going to be like, oh my God, that looks like a chicken nugget, I'm going to go for it. They're going to land on this hook, and we're going to pull it out very, very slowly. And that's what that process is going to look like. You have somebody on one side of that line pulling ever so gently, because we don't want to make the shark uncomfortable. Sometimes we don't even know if there's a shark on the line. So we have to be very, very careful because we don't want to hurt them. So the shark on the line is, you can see it here at the bottom. That is a small nurse shark. Nurse sharks are very common here in South Florida. So what they're going to do is going to remove it from the water very, very carefully, and we're going to do something that's called a workup. So this is specific to smaller species of sharks. This, on the other hand, is specific to larger species of sharks. So think about the big bull sharks, the big tiger sharks, the big nurse sharks that are probably bigger than I am, more or less. So what this looks like is you're gonna have a buoy over at the top with a really, really thick line that connects to something that's called a drum. A drum is a really, really big, think of it as like a bag of cement that's really, really heavy, and it uses it to anchor on the seafloor. Sometimes it can weigh about 40 to 50 pounds, and that's really, really heavy for somebody to carry. If you're moving that around the boat, you're going to definitely feel it in your biceps, and you're going to have really, really cool arms by the end of the day. So that's a pro. Right where that drum is, we also have a line that also connects to a circle hook, which, if you remember, a circle hook is designed to be able to be removed from the shark's mouth a lot more easily than other types of hooks. So same thing, is going to have a bait on that hook. Sharks are going to look at it, they're going to smell it, they're going to be like, that's a cool looking chicken nugget. And then they're going to grab it, they're going to be on the line, and then we're going to slowly pull them out. This is what deploying or setting a drum line looks like. We have a little bonito or tuna head here on this hook. It's going to be gently laid in the water. We have the buoy over there. The buoys actually help it both float and be visible to us while we're on the boat. So if we sort of see that buoy moving, we're going to be like, maybe there's a shark on the line, and we're going to check on it, because we don't really want to leave sharks on the line for a very, very long time, because we don't want to make them uncomfortable. We don't want to hurt them. Okay, so once we bring in the shark, we're going to do something that's called a workup. And that is, in my opinion, the best part. That's when you get to look at it up closely. You can see the different characteristics that I was talking about. What color is the shark? How big is the shark? What species is the shark? And if you want to give a name to the shark, you can also think about a name to the shark. Something like, I don't know, name it Timothy. Timothy the shark. That's all the different stuff that you can do while you're observing the shark or you're getting it on the boat. So what are we going to do once we start the workup? First of all, we're going to take measurements. So we're going to take something called a pre-caudal length. That is the first measurement that we're going to take. The pre-caudal length is specifically ending right before that tail starts to fan out. It's going to have like a little groove there, and that's where you're going to place your thumb, and then you're going to call out whatever measurement. Let's say it was 110 centimeters. And you're going to say PCL, which means pre-caudal length, 110. And somebody that's writing all of that information down is going to be like 110 PCL. That's how we confirm with each other on the boat that we have that measurement. We're going to do the same thing for the fork. The fork is right where that triangle for the two sides of the fin are going to start to separate. And finally, we have the total length, which is from the tippy tip from the snoot, from the nose, and then we're going to stretch it all the way to the tip of the tail. That is the total length. And this is an example of a measurement. So the person in the front, right where the shark's head is placing it really, really close to the nose. And then the other person is starting to place it right where the pre-caudal pit is. We want to make these measurements as fast as we can. The faster that we make a workup, the better. The faster we do the workup, the faster that the shark can be released. So let's see a couple of videos of how they take additional measurements like girth, which is going to be sort of like a hot dog. You're going to put it around the shark in what we call the little pits behind the pectoral fins. And that is going to be how thick the shark is. If we ever recapture the shark, we can take those measurements again and be like, oh my God, this is how much this shark has grown. And we can keep tabs on that. So that is a baby lemon being measured for girth. That is a very cute baby lemon, actually. I love lemons. All right. This measurement over here is the pre-caudal length. So the person is taking their thumb and pinching it right before that caudal fin or tail starts to fan out. Awesome. Another thing that's very important when we're doing the workup when we're observing the shark, we also need to make sure what sex the shark is. Sex means either male or female. So we're gonna tell between boy and girl. And the way that we do that is by observing their underside. The boys are always going to have something called claspers, which looks like, I would say, as an example, let's see. Think about like a spaghetti strip. This is not a spaghetti strip, but imagine a spaghetti strip. You're gonna have two. That's the left clasper and the right clasper. That is always going to be specific for the boys. The girls are not gonna have it at all. And sometimes you can even tell how old the shark is or if it's ready to have babies by how hard those claspers are, specifically in the boys. It's hard to tell with girls because they don't have anything external for us to say, hey, she's really, really mature. She's ready to have babies. But we can tell that with boys. Another thing that we do in the workup, this is called a fin clip. This is very, very special because there's a lot of information that you can get from a fin clip. So what they're going to do is when the shark is on the side of the boat, they're going to take a little snip at what we call the trailing edge of the dorsal fin. So that top triangle on the back of sharks is called the dorsal fin. That fin has a little projection, like a little smaller triangle behind it. That is called the trailing edge. And that is what they're going to do, what they're going to snip when we do a fin clip. So I would like to point out, because a lot of people ask this question, do sharks feel pain? And the thing is that they do, but they experience it very, very differently than us humans do. Sharks have less than 10%, we're talking about a really, really small portion of sensors that send information to the brain that something hurts. So they're probably going to feel a pinch and that's it. Because pain is not really useful to sharks in their environment because they have to be constantly swimming to find food, to find mates, to be able to have babies. So imagine having to constantly swim around, feeling uncomfortable, feeling that something hurts. Maybe they can't hunt as effectively. So it's believed that that's why they can't feel as much pain as we do. So it can cause a little bit of discomfort, yes, but we make sure that everything that we do on the workups is as least comfortable to the shark as possible, while also giving us the information that we need. So things like the fin clip can actually help us understand what the shark eats. And you might be like, oh my God, Jay, how can you tell what a shark eats from a little piece of fin? And that's because we have specific scientists that are specialized in looking into the tiny, tiny little details available inside this fin clip that tell secrets about the shark's life. And part of those secrets are what type of animals do they eat? Or more specific to what we call trophic levels. What level in the food web is the prey that this shark eats? So for example, if you have a shark that eats fish, that's a herbivore. Herbivores are plant eaters. Plants in the ocean sort of look like seagrass. So if it's a fish that eats seagrass, the information that's going to be available on that fin clip will connect to the seagrass. And you can sort of narrow down, oh, obviously sharks don't eat seagrass, so they're probably eating something that eats seagrass. So that's when they start brainstorming and having conversations, and they can be like, oh, they're probably eating this fish. And I think that's super, super cool. I love science. Okay, so let's talk about identification. This is also done during the workup. First, we could do something that's called a pit tag. A pit tag is this tiny, tiny little pill that you're going to put inside of a syringe. and you're going to inject that near the dorsal fin, that first triangle on the back of the shark. This is basically like information. Think about our pets, for example. You have a dog or a cat, you can take it to the vet and they could put something that's called a pit tag. So when these animals get lost, somebody can be like, oh, maybe this animal has a pit tag, and they're going to scan it. And that scan gives them all of the information of who's the owner, where it was found, and probably a number that they can call as well. So that way they can make sure that they get it back to their rightful owner. In our case, it gives us the exact same information, but it's in the case if somebody else catches the shark. They can be like, hey, I scanned this shark and I found this pit tag and it has this information. I'm letting you know that I caught this shark in Fort Lauderdale. I'm here in Miami. So let's say that another person caught this shark in Fort Lauderdale. I can write it down and be like, oh my God, cool. It meant that the shark that I tagged in Miami swam up to Fort Lauderdale. That doesn't give you GPS location. Like if you were to follow it on a phone, it just gives you information if somebody scans it and calls you, which is still pretty cool.
So we've got
This
this
is a pit
juvenile
tag.
lemon shark, a beautiful male, and now we need to see if we caught him previously in our work from previous years, or if he's never been caught by us before. So what we're going to do is scan our pit tag reader across his body, and actually we have caught him before. He is tagged already. That's really exciting because that means we can look at how long these guys are utilizing this area and continue to monitor their growth and utilization of this beautiful mangrove habitat.
Isn't that so cool? And the cool thing about pit tags is that they stay inside the body. So after it's injected the first time, you're good to go. And it'll be there throughout the shark's life. Another way that we can identify them during the workup is by something called a roto tag. Have you guys ever seen what looks like earrings on goats and cows and sheep? It's exactly the same thing, except we put it on the shark. So the shark has earrings, if you could say that. That has a specific number, and sometimes it has a phone number that people can call and be like, hey, I caught this shark number 33, and it had your number on it. And I could be like, cool, that also means that the shark swam elsewhere and I can now track it that way. These are a little bit more flimsy. They can fall off. So most of the time they tend to use the pit tags that we just saw. This is the one that I use in our lab. I forgot to say this at first. I am a McDonald Lab intern, which is the shark conservation program at the University of Miami. This is a specific type of tag that they use. Depending on the lab or the researcher, they're going to use different types of tags that are specific to them. It's just personal preference. This one is sort of like inserted to the front portion of that triangle, that dorsal fin, and is going to look like a spaghetti coming off. And inside of that spaghetti, you're going to have the number ID for the shark, and you're going to have the number that people can call in case they found that shark. It's the same purpose for the other two ones that we just saw. This one might be a little bit harder to insert because sharks have really, really thick skin. So you have to sort of wiggle it around and make sure it's anchored so it can be able to hold on. Okay, and this is one of the coolest tags that have ever existed, in my opinion. This is called an acoustic tag. So acoustics function with sound or pings. It looks like a little battery. Depending on the size of the shark is the size of that pill that you're gonna put inside them. This does require what we call surgery. You have to make a little tiny incision or hole to be able to put this in. But sharks heal really, really fast. In less than 2 days, that's as good as gone. So this is what that would look like. The person is suturing that pill inside the shark's body. And then it has this really, really cool purpose. You're going to see in just a second. So the shark has the pill inserted into his body, right? That pill can actually send signals to what's called an acoustic receiver. That receiver, think of it as like a speaker, and that speaker's constantly listening for specific sounds that are compatible with this speaker. So if a shark has a pill that has a compatible sound with this speaker, it'll send a signal and be like, hey, this shark just swam right next to your speaker. And you're going to be like, oh my God, cool. It means that this shark is in the area. It can ping multiple times. You can have multiple sharks that ping at the same time. And that can give you a lot of information of whether this shark is staying here for a long time, if it's going in and out of this region. So we can get a lot of information about their life this way. This is an accelerometer tag. An accelerometer tag measures speed. So you can attach it to the dorsal fin, that top triangle on the shark's back, and it can measure how fast a shark swims. And you might think, why is it useful to measure how fast a shark swims, right? And that can actually tell you a lot of information. It can tell you how the shark hunts. Because, for example, you don't know whether this shark likes to hide and ambush the animals that they want to eat, or if this shark just waits to find something that's already deceased. But looking at an accelerometer, you see short bursts of energy. Like, oh, in a couple of seconds, it went from 5 miles per hour to 15 miles per hour. And you see that trend sort of many, many times. You could probably tell that the shark is feeding. So it means that it's chasing something. So you can tell a lot more about how this shark behaves and how it looks for food just by looking at how fast it looks. This is another type of tag called a pop-off satellite tag. So this tag is inserted into the shark and it stays there for a certain amount of hours. Whoever puts the tag on can choose how many hours it's on the shark. Usually it's not more than a day. So it follows the shark around, even though it's attached to it. And it can measure if the sharks go very, very deep, or if they come back up, if they have bursts of speed as well. So it's kind of like journaling for a shark. The shark is writing everything that it has done during the day. And that is specifically inside of this tag. The information is stored there. So after those 24 hours, that tag is just going to fall off and it's going to float to the surface. It's going to send a signal to be like, hey, pick me up, I'm ready. And then the scientist is going to go on their boat, pick it up, and then it's going to read that journal, read all of that information that the shark did in that day. So this is what that would look like. So it's currently recording, it's writing in that journal everything that the shark is doing. You get it during the day, during the nighttime. And then the next day, boop, it falls off. It sends a signal and it's ready to get picked up. Cool. This is another type of satellite tag. This is actually one of the most expensive tags that there is. And it's really, really cool to use. It's very useful depending on the type and quality of the tag. It can last you more than 5 years. So imagine getting to experience the life of a shark for so long. That is amazing. But there is the factor that it's so expensive that not a lot of people can afford it. We're talking about good satellite tags are probably more than $5,000–7,000, which is really, really, really above our budget. But in cases when you can use it, it's the same thing. It documents sort of like in a journal everything that the shark does, but it also gives you a GPS location literally live. So you can track the shark. I don't know if you guys have ever seen follow bracelets. If you buy a follow bracelet, it connects you to a specific animal. I have like 3 that are sharks because I'm totally obsessed with them. But you can look in your phone, they have an app, and they connect you with a specific shark that's tagged via satellite. So you can see where the shark is traveling. So that's super cool. They have other stuff on the internet available as well. You can see, oh my God, it went up to North Carolina, or it swam up to the Gulf of Mexico and it came back to Puerto Rico. And you see crazy stuff like that. And you're like, oh my God, what would it be like to be a shark? And that sort of gives you an idea of how much they swim during the day, how they hunt, a lot of cool stuff. So this is what that live tracking looks like. You have that initial dot, which is where the shark was tagged. When you let it go, it starts documenting and writing in that journal where the shark is going. And that really depends on the life of the battery. If the battery dies earlier than the tag can, unfortunately, that's how much you can get to know. And you almost always never retrieve these tags. So as you can see, this shark swam hundreds of miles, and that's very, very hard to keep up with. And these are many, many months of information. We went from October 2016, and by the end of the video, we were at about mid-spring. So that is a lot of information that's useful to science. So that's sending information to the satellites. The same thing happens with our phones. Satellites are just a way of communication. The way that we can communicate with other people's phones is because our information gets sent to a satellite and then it gets sent to their phone. It's the same thing with this tag. Okay. So other ways that we can look at sharks without having to tag them, without having to work them up, because sometimes, the shark can escape from the hook, or it just never landed in the hook in the first place, or you just want to look at sharks in a way that doesn't involve having them in the hook in the first place. This is called a BRUV, a baited remote underwater vehicle. So it's like a structure that gives it some weight so it can anchor to the ground, and a waterproof camera at the top. And that is all you need. Sometimes you can add like a little cage that has some bait in it, so that it can attract sharks. Again, with the fancy chicken nuggets, they can smell it, they can see it, and they're gonna be like, oh, I kind of want to figure out what that is. So they come near the camera. So that's how it's deployed very easily. You just put it in the water and wait for the sharks to come. And this is what it feels like to be the eyes of the camera. So experiencing what the camera experiences when it's in the water. So that at the front is actually where the bait is located, and we're going to see a very curious friend in a couple of seconds come in and try to figure out what that bait is. That is a Nerf shark, and it's looking very, very, very curious. It's giving it some nibbles. So as you can see, just by telling from the video, you can identify the species. If you're good at telling size, I am notoriously bad at telling size from a video, but I know people that are very, very good at telling size. You can probably measure the shark. You can also look at if the shark has specific spots that make it unique. if it has some sort of scar that makes it unique. And that's how a lot of sharks in many places get different names because people can identify them by their physical characteristics. Cool. This is what it's like to be a camera looking at a bigger shark. This is a great hammerhead. These guys can grow more than 16 feet. That is really, really big. So same thing here in the front, you have bait located there. And that hammer was just like, this is interesting. Let me see what this is. But it didn't come in for a nibble. Okay, on to one of the most important parts of this presentation. Why do we study sharks in the first place? I have been totally obsessed with sharks since I was 7 years old, and it's completely my grandma's fault. She knows this. We joke about this all of the time. It was because she sat me down to see a YouTube video about Deep Blue, the shark. She was swimming in the Galapagos. She was a very, very pregnant, really big white shark. She was at least 21 feet long, and I obsessed. Could never drill it out of my brain even. And the more that I learned about sharks by reading, by looking at documentaries, movies, the more that I was like, sharks are actually very important. And I want to do something about it. That's why I started studying them in the first place. So, sad fact about sharks in the world that we live in is that a lot more of them pass away because of us than the other way around. We're talking about millions more. On a yearly basis, more than 100 million sharks end up passing away because of some sort of activity that humans do, whether it be fishing, whether it be because they passed away on accident, because we caught them accidentally, because we weren't even looking for them, or other factors that have to do with there's too much trash in the ocean, or the oceans are getting too hot. Everything sort of revolves around how humans have impacted our oceans. And it's not just sharks that are under threat. We have a lot of marine species that are under threat, and many of these species rely on each other, sort of like the circle of life. And what I want you to understand is that we are also part of this circle of life. We depend as much on them as they do on us. So it's very important to stand in a position where you're like, what can I do to help? So sharks, on the most part, are actually caught on accident on what we call commercial fisheries. So these really, really long nets, very long lines that are trying to catch anything that's not sharks. But most of the time they have baits, and as we saw, there are techniques that actually land sharks that are using the same things: the bait, the hook, and the long line. So it's very easy for them to actually get caught. But there's some species that are very, very delicate, and they can actually pass away if they're in there for too long. For example, the great hammerhead, which is a spectacular species that everybody loves. It looks really freaky with a big head. It's actually very, very, very delicate, and it can't last too long when it's on the line. So most of the time that it lands on a commercial fishery, it ends up passing away. And a lot of them don't report them in time, or they don't report them at all. So science doesn't really know exactly how many sharks are passing away. We just know it's a lot of them. And that sort of gets complicated when we're trying to help them, because we don't know how much we really need to do to be able to keep the sharks in our ocean, because each and every single shark has their specific needs and has their specific threats as well. So these are the different threats that we see. I already mentioned a little bit of it. Most of it has to do with humans again. And I want you to see this video. Hopefully it plays. Yes. I want you to observe very closely. This is a beautiful, beautiful white shark. But there's something sort of like around the girth of the shark. That is actually a rope or a line. And it's actually starting to cut into the shark in a way that has to feel very, very uncomfortable. So what happened probably is that when the shark was younger, and then it ended up getting caught in either one of these fisheries or in some sort of abandoned thing that some fishermen left. And it actually sort of like it managed to tie its way across the shark. And the shark kept on growing and growing and growing. So this might as well be part of the shark at this point. And this shark is probably not going to last as long as it could last if it didn't have that on. Because, you know, the rope and the line doesn't grow anymore, but the shark does. So eventually it'll unfortunately take its life. So even if the animal is alive, humans are still impacting them in a way that's very, very, very sad. But not everything has to be sadness, right? There's still stuff that we can do to make the world better. And I'm not talking about swimming with sharks or telling everybody what's my favorite shark, although those things are helpful. We can do small stuff like picking trash from the beach, even if it's not ours, or somebody that's scared of sharks and thinks that sharks shouldn't be in our oceans, having a conversation with them, being like, hey, I actually learned about sharks, and sharks are really, really cool, and they do a lot for our oceans, and we should keep them here for a long time. Cool thing about sharks is that they have been here way longer than all of us have. They have been here for more than 400 million years. That is older than trees. Trees evolved 300 million years ago. That is older than the North Star, and that is older than the rings of Saturn. So we're talking about ancient species that have changed very, very little, which means that they are exceptionally great at just being sharks. And the earth loves them in a way that protects them to keep them in their waters for a very long time. If an animal weren't useful to the world in that way, the world itself wouldn't even bother to keep them here for that long, right? So imagine all of these beautiful animals after 400 million years come to an end because humans couldn't protect them, even though we're part of the earth itself. So it's very, very important to sort of feel empowered and be like, hey, I can actually do something about this, even if it's something small. It doesn't have to be anything revolving around money. It doesn't have to be anything revolving around something big like having a whole community come out. Sometimes it's not possible, right? Sometimes our lives are really fast. We have to keep up with school. We have to keep up with things that we do outside of school, like sports and having, a good time with our family. But whenever we have the opportunity, like when we're walking outside and we see trash, we can be like, I can pick this up, and I'm actually making a difference just by picking this up. Okay, and that wraps this up to an end. Again, I love talking about this. The world of sharks is very, very big, but also very, very complicated. I know there can be a lot of questions involved. That's why I invite you that even though you're just starting to learn about sharks now, to continue to learn about them, to continue to ask questions, and to continue to be curious, because that's what science is. Science is about asking even the smallest of questions just to get some answers. And even after you have those answers, you ask even more questions. And that is what makes us humans great, is that we have the capacity to do so much by just being ourselves, by doing simple things, right? I will continue to dedicate my life to shark science and to understanding sharks and to try to keep them around for as long as they can. And I hope that at some moment, all of you feel the need to not only protect sharks, but protect our oceans in general and be able to keep them around for your friends and your family and your future children if you want to have children. Just keep them around. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to let me know. I will open space now for questions, concerns, all that jazz.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone is giving Jeyna a round of applause. We appreciate your expertise and sharing your passion of sharks with us, letting us know how we can help be better stewards of the land and better protectors of shark species. It was really cool to see all the different tags and ways scientists get information to inform their research or to answer questions. So we do have some questions, and
Yes.
we're going to start with one that is really simple. What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite species?
I do, but it's so hard. It's so hard. Almost all the time it wants to change, but I'm like, I need to solidify my answer forever. It's a scalloped hammerhead. There are actually 10 species of hammerheads. A lot of people don't know that. The most recent hammerhead was discovered last year. The shovelhead, I believe, is very similar to the bonnet head, the smallest species. But I would say the scalloped is about the second smallest. It seconds the great hammerhead. And they have these really cool grooves in their head that they use sort of like a shovel to be able to find prey. And I think that's super cool.
That is cool. Awesome. Okay, next question. What made you want to be a scientist? You shared how your grandmother had an impact on your interest in sharks, but were there any other experiences that you had that kind of solidified for you that I want to be a scientist?
Yes, yes. A lot of it had to do with where I was born. I was born in Puerto Rico, born and bred. So I had a lot of access to the ocean. I really didn't get to see sharks much at all, but I always felt some sort of affinity to the water. So very early on, I sort of knew that what I wanted to do in life was somehow related to the ocean. Like I loved feeling the sand in my feet and the smell of salt and getting to drink coconut water directly from the palm tree. And my mother, she was a young mother, she would take me to the beach and that would be our bonding time as well. But when I figured out that what I wanted to do was sharks, was when I was reading a chapter about how humans perceive sharks. My favorite movie has always been Jaws, and I never thought much of it until I started reading about how the directors and some people that were involved in this movie had to start a program for conservation to protect sharks because people were so scared of them that they started either hunting them or didn't want to protect them anymore. And they were like, no, this was entirely fiction. Half of what happened in this movie isn't even possible. Like a white shark coming into the river is completely impossible. Although we have seen it in areas where there's a lot less salt, but most of it is fiction. And it was during a time where I sort of like felt like an oddball, at school, with family. I was sort of like figuring out what I wanted, who I was. I didn't even know how to dress in a way that I liked. It was like that odd moment of life where you're like, oh my God, who am I? And that sort of translates most of the time to feeling misunderstood. So looking at animals that have always been chronically misunderstood sort of connected in me in a way of like, I somewhat felt identified with sharks And I was like, oh, they've been misunderstood their entire lives. Their entire history has been misunderstood. And I feel like an oddball myself. So I'm just going to focus on sharks from now on. And that was really it. So I have a lot of emotional attachment to elasmobranchs and sharks in general
Yeah,
from like 10, 11 years.
that's nice. That's great. Thank you for sharing that personal experience
Yeah.
with us. Yeah. I think we have time for one more question. And so a lot of times in elementary school, teachers are working with students, and students are learning like the scientific method. So what is a hypothesis, how to make
Yeah.
observations and collect data and look at what it's telling us. Beyond science, what are other skills that are important in your line of work besides the hard science that you're doing? What would you say are also equally important?
Oh, that's a good one. I would say definitely learning to work as a team and learning how to both voice what you feel, but also accepting other people's voices. Science cannot work without having a bunch of people involved because we all have different brains. How this person solves a mystery or a problem is very different from how I would solve it. But by coming together, we can make a plan and it ends up being even better. And if you don't learn how to accept people around you, to work with people around you, to be able to, just ask questions and accept answers. Science purely runs on that, on being diverse. And it's not even with people that think differently, it's with people that come from different places and look differently
Mhm.
from you because they have different experiences. For example, my experience was growing up on an island, but a lot of my friends grew up on the northern part of the United States and they never saw a beach before coming to graduate school. So, how they approach questions in marine science are very, very different to mine because I had a more direct relationship, but
Mhm.
they may have ideas that I had never thought of before because they come from outside of the box. So, yes, I would say learning to work as a team and accepting each other is just as important in science as learning how to make a hypothesis and how to write methods and how to ask questions.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. So glad to have everyone out in the world with us today, learning more about shark science and the tools that scientists use to hopefully support the health and future well-being of shark species around the world. Jeyna, thank you so much for being here. Don't forget Sharks for Kids. We have resources for eco schools and Sharks for Kids in the resources section, so be sure to grab those. We look forward to our schools joining as eco schools if you're not already, and be on the lookout for just more collaborations between us. And if you're a Ranger Rick reader, be sure to read about Sharks for Kids in this summer's June-July edition. Take care, everybody.
Thank you guys so much for spending some time with me. Take care.